There, hated the day. The day was a miserable day. I mean, it was a...
Really? I thought...
Well, was it? Well, I can tell you now, it was the worst royal engagement I ever did, a royal wedding I ever did, because Harry was determined to keep the newspapers away from it as much as possible. Everything was done on long lenses. I mean, I can't tell you, I had an 800mm lens photographing the guests arriving. And the photographers they engaged...
About the wedding, everyone was made to feel unwelcome.
Not everybody, just the
British
media.
press.
Yeah,
just
British
the people
press,
that travel the whole world, and spend their whole life.
All my life, you know. And then Oprah Winfrey had met them once. She was a guest. The Clooneys, you know, the guests. I mean, never met them before, but they were the guests. And you know, I thought to myself, you know, this is all showbiz. Rubbish, you know.
Did you ever get a sense then that they wanted out, that they wanted a California life? That they...
Forget the polished fairy tale that television painted. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's wedding wasn't the grand royal celebration it was billed to be. To those who witnessed it closely, it looked less like a union of tradition and more like a spectacle designed for cameras, star-studded guest lists, and glossy headlines. The carriages, the choirs, the sweeping shots of celebrities arriving, all of it played like a carefully choreographed performance.
This week was their 7th week. Do you remember that? You must remember. Where were you on this? You were there in Windsor.
Oh, I was there. Hated the day. The day was a miserable day. I mean, it was a...
Really? I thought...
Well, was it? Well, I can tell you now, it was the worst royal engagement I ever did, a royal wedding I ever did, because Harry was determined to keep the newspapers away from it as much as possible. Everything was done on long lenses. I mean, I can't tell you, I had an 800mm lens photographing the guests arriving. And the photographers they engaged for the job was 5 feet away, you know. It was just hopeless. And then the carriage shot, when they went past me in the carriage, they looked the other way. So for me, it was a disaster. And
well, was that deliberate?
But beneath the glitter, royal photographer Arthur Edwards recalls a very different scene. What looked enchanting on screen was, in reality, an uncomfortable day marred by chaos and disregard for protocol. Guests sweltered under the blazing heat, packed tightly in heavy gowns and suits, while senior royals who had served the crown for decades were shuffled to the back rows. In their place, Hollywood actors and celebrity acquaintances with the flimsiest connections to the couple were ushered into prime seats. It didn't feel like Windsor Castle was honouring its own. It felt like a red carpet gala dressed up as a royal wedding. Even the press, the very machine that carried the spectacle to millions worldwide, felt deliberately shut out. Prince Harry avoided eye contact with cameras, turned his head during key moments, and made it nearly impossible for photographers to do their job. For Arthur Edwards, who had documented some of the most iconic royal events of the last half-century, this was unprecedented. He admitted it was the only royal wedding in which not a single photograph of his ever made it to print. It wasn't accidental either. Photographers were forced to work with long telephoto lenses from awkward distances, scrambling to salvage something usable. Edwards described it as punishment, a clear sign that the couple had no intention of cooperating with the press. What should have been a historic occasion became, for the media tasked with capturing it, a day of frustration and failure. Instead of celebrating with timeless images, many walked away empty-handed, their work sabotaged by a royal groom determined to send a message.
He was born. That was another, in my view, a disaster, because I knew we was not going to get a picture of it. Everybody was hoping we would get pictures of it. I mean, obviously, when William was born and Harry was born and George and Charlotte and Louis, we got great pictures outside the hospital. I remember, and William and Catherine especially, they made such an effort to show the whole world their new baby. But I mean, I say this, but I mean, Harry's baby, Archie, was almost teething before we found out it was born. You know, I mean, it was. We were led to believe that she was gone into labour at 2 o'clock when the baby had been born many hours earlier. We were led to believe it was going to be a home birth, and it was at a hospital. There was that. The whole thing was just stage managed to suit them. And in fact, I never stayed in Windsor. There was a royal tour.
For the guests inside Windsor, the reality was even harsher than what the cameras showed. Beneath the glitter of television coverage, the atmosphere was suffocating. The May sun bored down mercilessly, turning designer gowns and tailored suits into stifling traps. Guests sat shoulder to shoulder, struggling to stay composed as sweat rolled down their faces. Women fanned themselves desperately, makeup smudged, tempers rising, and patience running thin. Arthur Edwards, who had weathered countless royal ceremonies, from Charles and Diana to William and Kate, confessed that none compared to this ordeal. Royal weddings have faced storms, icy winds, and blazing heat before, but this was different. The problem wasn't the weather itself. It was the lack of care. Attendees felt less like honoured guests and more like props in a global broadcast. Smiles shone on television screens, but behind them people were quietly miserable, enduring hours of discomfort simply to maintain the illusion.
In I think Munich, the first pictures of Archie that was taken by the Press Association. I remember showing her on my phone, and she sort of, and that was the first time she saw him. You know, so it was difficult times. I have to say though, you know, that first year of Meghan, that working with her on the road, I mean, you know, we went all over the country. I mean, she was incredible. I mean, I thought she was. And I was saying this, you know, I thought she was a great asset to the family. And I kept asking the palace if we could have a meeting with her. You know, the royal people, the people who cover the royals, could have a meeting with Meghan, like we did with Catherine. And, you know, so introduce ourselves and let her to know who was writing about her and photographing her. And I was assured it was going to happen, but it never did. And then pretty soon, like, you know, she'd made her mind up that they were going, and that was it. But
you get a sense.
For those inside, it was humiliating. The message was unmistakable. Tradition and service no longer mattered. What mattered was which famous face would look best when the lenses zoomed in. Guests whispered in disbelief, some calling the spectacle more of a red carpet stunt than a royal wedding. Arthur Edwards himself joked that he practically needed a map to locate his seat, hidden away and obstructed, as though decades of service to the crown were worth less than a fleeting celebrity connection. Windsor Castle no longer felt like a place of royal heritage. It felt like a glossy awards show masquerading as monarchy. If guests were hoping the reception would rescue the day, they were sorely disappointed. A royal wedding traditionally means grandeur, with banquet tables stretching endlessly, silver platters piled high, and champagne flowing without pause. But Meghan and Harry's reception was stripped of that splendour. Instead of feasts worthy of Windsor, guests were offered bite-sized canopies, tiny portions that looked good in photographs but left people quietly hungry.
Talking about the wedding, everyone was made to feel unwelcome.
not everybody, just the
British
media.
press,
Yeah,
just
British
the people
press,
that travel the whole world, and spend their whole life.
All my life,
covering.
you know. And then Oprah Winfrey had met them once. She was a guest. The Clooneys, you know, the guests. I mean, never met them before, but they were the guests. And you know, I thought to myself, you know, this is all showbiz rubbish, you know.
Did you get a sense then that they wanted out, that they wanted a California life, that they wanted showbiz, that they weren't interested? If they weren't interested in making people feel welcome at the wedding, it just seems to me they made a decision back in 7 years ago. That they
I'm looking. I mean, Oprah Winfrey was there, and
Arthur Edwards described it bluntly. It wasn't a royal banquet. It was closer to a cocktail party. Men and women dressed in £1,000 outfits picked at miniature avocado toasts and macarons that vanished in a single bite. For many, it was embarrassing, almost insulting. The food symbolised the entire event, stylish presentation with no real substance. What was meant to be a moment of unity and celebration ended with guests murmuring their disbelief. Some laughed at the absurdity, others left annoyed, and nearly everyone agreed it was unlike any royal wedding they had ever attended. Instead of abundance, it felt like austerity wrapped in glamour, a deliberate statement that emphasised image over tradition. As if the stifling heat, humiliating seating and lacklustre food weren't enough, Prince Harry turned the entire event into a battle with the press. Instead of embracing the role every royal before him had played, smiling for photographs, creating moments to be remembered, Harry did the opposite. He avoided eye contact, turned his head during key shots, and positioned himself to block any chance of a clean photo. For professionals like Arthur Edwards, who had captured Charles, Diana, William and Kate with ease, this wedding became an impossible task. Every opportunity for tradition to shine, the carriage ride, the formal procession, the vows, was tainted by Harry's determination to deny the press even a single iconic shot. Long lenses were the only lifeline, with photographers straining to salvage fragments of the day from far-off vantage points. Edwards admitted it was the first royal wedding in his decades-long career where not one respectable image made it to publication. It wasn't clumsiness or accident, it was deliberate. Harry saw the press as enemies, and instead of rising above, he used the wedding to punish them. A moment that should have symbolized joy and continuity became a stage for bitterness and resentment. Royal weddings are meant to balance pageantry with centuries of ritual, symbols that anchor the monarchy in continuity. This one abandoned that entirely. Instead of the steady dignity seen at Charles and Diana's union or the graceful modernity of William and Kate's, Meghan and Harry's ceremony felt like a rebrand. The sermon echoed more like a Hollywood performance than a sacred tradition, dramatic in tone, but lacking the reverence that usually defines such moments. Everything about the day seemed designed for headlines, not heritage. Rituals that once underscored loyalty, faith, and family unity were minimized or stripped away, replaced with flourishes tailored for global press coverage and social media chatter. To those in attendance, it felt less like honoring the monarchy and more like showcasing individuality. Edwards sensed it immediately. The wedding wasn't built on the weight of history, it was curated as a spectacle. Guests, expecting a continuation of royal values, instead saw a declaration of independence, a message from Meghan and Harry that they didn't need the family and they didn't care for its rules. What should have been a celebration of legacy became a staged moment of defiance. When the confetti cleared, the damage became obvious. Meghan and Harry didn't step into a new role within the monarchy, they stepped away from it. Invitations to stay at royal estates were politely declined, replaced with hotels and private security arrangements that gave them control but severed family ties. Grandparents who longed to spend time with Archie and Lilibet were left heartbroken, watching their grandchildren grow from afar as strangers. Arthur Edwards recalled one particularly painful moment when the Queen first saw a photo of Archie, not in person, but on his phone. That was the reality. Milestones that once united the royal family were reduced to distant glimpses, filtered through layers of separation. To Edwards, it was a tragedy. A generation of young royals cut off from cousins, traditions, and the bonds that had defined the family for centuries. The contradiction was glaring. Meghan and Harry often spoke publicly about the importance of family and compassion, yet their own children were denied close relationships with their blood relatives. Privacy became less about protection and more about exclusion, a shield that kept the royal family at arm's length while their story was packaged and sold to the world. What began as a wedding spectacle quietly evolved into a campaign of estrangement. If the wedding was a performance, the Oprah interview was the encore, and it was even more explosive. Sitting in front of carefully arranged cameras, Meghan and Harry unleashed a wave of accusations that shook the monarchy's image worldwide. They framed themselves as victims of cruelty and racism, casting the royal family as villains in a narrative that allowed no rebuttal. To Arthur Edwards, this wasn't an attempt at reconciliation, it was a spectacle, a deliberate strike designed to dominate headlines and keep the spotlight firmly on them. The timing said everything. Public sympathy had begun to fade, and their influence was starting to dim, so they produced a scandal large enough to reignite global attention. Millions tuned in expecting raw honesty, but what they got was a polished script, a broadcast built to embarrass the monarchy while elevating the Sussexes' personal brand. The fallout was devastating. Trust within the family eroded further, relationships fractured beyond repair, and the royal image took one of its hardest hits in modern history. For Meghan and Harry, though, the chaos worked. The coverage guaranteed relevance, and relevance meant power. What looked like a confessional was, in truth, a well-crafted performance. One that cemented their break from tradition and turned family conflict into global drama. Looking back, Meghan and Harry's wedding wasn't the start of a new royal chapter. It was the blueprint for everything that followed. What the world saw as a glittering fairy tale was, behind the cameras, a boiling scandal built on arrogance and image. Guests wilted in the heat, loyal royals were sidelined for celebrity cameos, the food was laughably meagre, and photographers were blocked at every turn. Instead of honouring centuries of tradition, the couple used the event as a springboard to launch their own brand. And once the wedding ended, the pattern continued. Every interview, every public outburst, every carefully timed reveal followed the same formula. Scandal as currency. The Oprah interview was only the loudest example, transforming private family struggles into global entertainment. What should have been remembered as a day of unity became the opening act of a circus that has never truly ended. That's the legacy Arthur Edwards pointed to, not a celebration, but a calculated performance that fractured ties and rewrote royal history. A wedding that promised a fairy tale delivered something far different. A roadmap of drama, estrangement, and showbiz politics that continues to echo through the monarchy today. And that's the truth behind Meghan and Harry's so-called royal fairy tale. It wasn't a union steeped in tradition. It was the launchpad of a global brand built on scandal and spectacle. From the wedding day to the Oprah interview, every move chipped away at the monarchy's dignity and replaced it with headlines, drama, and division. What millions thought was a love story turned out to be the opening chapter of a long-running circus.